العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In last week's lesson we were looking at the section with regard to zakat, and I mentioned the conditions and the requirements or the prerequisites which are required for zakat to be obligatory and fard. Now zakat is a pillar of Islam, it's a fundamental of Islam, to such an extent that if someone was to deny the obligation of zakat, if someone was to say that zakat is not obligatory, it's not fard, then such a view and such an opinion takes the person out of the fold of Islam. So what we can gather is that zakat is the pillar of Islam, it's obligatory, it's fard the same way namaz, salah is fard and obligatory, the same way fasting in the month of Ramadan is obligatory, the same way Hajj once in a lifetime is obligatory. Then similarly zakat and giving 2.5% of your annual savings, which are obviously besides your necessities, then that is also an obligation, and that is also fard, a pillar of Islam. If someone was to deny this obligation, then as I just already mentioned, it will take him out of the fold of Islam. Also last week went on to mention the conditions for zakat to be obligatory and also the conditions required to dispense of zakat. Now there are two main conditions which need to be found when it comes to you dispensing your zakat, when it comes to you giving the zakat to the recipient. The first condition is that there has to be intention, and we looked at that in last week's lesson. And the second condition, which is also imperative, which is also necessary as well, is something in Arabic we call tamlik. Now tamlik basically means to make the recipient of the zakat, i.e. the poor or the needy, to make him the owner of that. That's what it means by tamlik. What I mean by that is that you can't just say, for example, give £50 zakat money to a poor person, and then you say to him that, okay, after 1 year, I want you to give me this £50 back. Because that is not making him tamlik of the zakat wealth. You just like you place a condition that it's more like you borrowed him £50. Or like, for example, you can't say to him that, okay, this is zakat money, or these are some clothes, or these are some medicine, or like, for example, this is a house which I have built for you from zakat money. I want you to do this with this house, I want you to do with that with the house, or I've given you some clothes, I want you to do this with the clothes, that with the clothes, I've given you some medicine from zakat money, I want you to use it only on yourself or your family, not on this person. As soon as you start making conditions on what to do with the zakat money, then that is that you haven't dispensed of your zakat. You have to make the poor person the total owner of the zakat money. If you start making conditions that, or you have to do this, or you have to do A, B, and C, then you haven't actually given him total ownership of the zakat money. So therefore, by giving zakat to someone, but then you're placing conditions on top, then such a person's zakat will not be done and will not be fulfilled. So that's what zakat is, that you give it to the poor. Now, if the poor now wants to use this money in haram things, then that's up to him. If he wants to now get the money and then throw it away in the bin, then that's up to him. Because obviously you're not responsible for that. But what you are required to do and what is obligatory for you, for your zakat to be done, is that you give the zakat money to the poor and you make him the full owner of that. Which in Arabic we use the word tamlik to describe that, like you making the full ownership of the zakat money. It's not like you place conditions that, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that, or I'm giving you this house made with zakat money, I want only you to stay there, not your son, or I want only you to stay there, not your wife. As soon as you start making conditions with the zakat money, then your zakat will not be done. Which then takes me on to a question which a brother asked last week, is with regard to give zakat money to madrasa students or to students who are in the path of Allah, who are studying and so on and so forth. Now we look at this word, path of Allah, later on when we look at the recipients of zakat and what Allah mentioned, وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and the exact interpretation or the commentary of the word وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Now generally speaking, what normally happens is that you cannot give zakat money for the building of a masjid. We're going to look at this later, but I need to explain this firstly so we understand the ruling. You can't give zakat money for the building of a masjid. You can't give zakat money for the building or for the construction of a madrasa. If there's a madrasa or Islamic school, you can't give them zakat money for their electricity bills, for their gas bills, for their carpet, for painting, these kind of things, or the construction or the actual erection of a madrasa building or a masjid. You're not allowed to give zakat money for that. And one of the reasons, as I've already explained before, is that when you give zakat money, you have to give it to someone who can do some leak of the zakat money, who can actually take the zakat money into his ownership. And because buildings cannot actually, they don't have any kind of physical state in terms of, they don't have any intellect, so because buildings cannot actually take zakat money into their ownership, so therefore you cannot give zakat to buildings, you cannot give zakat for the making of a masjid, for the making of, say, a madrasa, or like some people say, like for the Islamic channels and so on and so forth. You can't give zakat money for those kind of things. Now this takes me on to, you may then argue and say, well, there's a lot of madrasas in the UK where if we were to look at the receipts, when you give them donations, they'll always have 3 boxes there, either lillah, sadaqah or zakat. So you may then be thinking that, okay, if these madrasas or masjids are not allowed to take zakat money, then why do they on their receipt book have a box where it says, okay, your £20 donation, was it for sadaqah, was it for zakat, was it for lillah? Why do they then have that particular box when, as I've already explained, you're not allowed to give zakat to them? Now, do you know that box which they have, the £20 for zakat and so on? What happens is that these madrasas, they take this zakat money, but they don't actually use it for the construction of the madrasa, they don't actually use it for the carpet, they don't actually use it for the painting, they don't actually use it for the electricity bills or the gas bills. But what they do is that they use that zakat money for the poor students who are in the madrasa, who are in the Islamic school studying. And even in the UK as well, just because we think that we're in the UK doesn't mean everyone's rich in the UK. There are many students who are studying in Darwin Bury. There were many students who couldn't actually afford their fees, the yearly fees, they couldn't afford it. So they are then considered to be poor, fakir. And as we're going to look at later, you can actually give zakat to poor and needy people. So many students, even now as well in Darwin Bury, Dewsbury, other kind of darulooms and madarises in the UK, they are actually poor students who have come from, say, family where the family is not well off, where, for example, could be like a single parent family and so on. So their parents can't actually afford to pay the tuition fee. So what happens is that the zakat money which the madrasa gives to the students, they're not actually giving it for the tuition fee. Remember, you can't give zakat for tuition fee. But they're giving it to them because they are poor. And you can actually give zakat money to the poor. Now there afterwards, if the poor students, if they now give it back to the madrasa as tuition fees, then that would now be permissible. Okay, so look, the madrasa had it, that was zakat for them. Now when the madrasa gave it to the poor students, so now that now becomes zakat. Now when the poor students now in turn give it back to the madrasa with the intention of tuition fees, now their tuition fees will be accepted, and also it will be lawful and permissible for the madrasa to use that money for the refurbishment or the construction of the building. And this in Arabic we call it tabdeel al-milkiyah, the changing of ownership. And this is actually mentioned, a very famous hadith which can be found in the books of Sunan like Abu Dawood and Sunan al-Tirmidhi of Sayyidah Barira radhiyallahu anha, where once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to her house. She was actually the freed slave of Sayyidah Aisha Anha, and there was some meat which was being cooked in the pot, in the utensil. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to her that, aren't you going to give me some meat? So Barira Anha replied by saying, O Prophet of Allah, this is zakat. Now the meat which I've got is from zakat. It's from, obviously we can look at later, you also give zakat from animals as well. So the meat which was being cooked, it was actually from zakat taken from animals. So Barira was saying to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I can't give you because its meat is zakat and you cannot take zakat. We're going to look at this later. The family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's unlawful for them to take zakat. So Barira was saying that, look, I can't give you this because this is from zakat. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said to her that for you it's zakat and for me it will be a gift and a hadiyah. Basically, when the meat was given to you, so that was zakat. But now from the meat, when you now give it to me, it's now considered as a gift. So this is what we call tabdeel al-milkiyya, the changing of ownership. So similarly here as well, when the madrasa gave the zakat money to the students, it was zakat. But now when the student now in turn gives that same money back to the madrasa, it's now considered to be for the tuition fee. So therefore, with that same amount of money, the madrasa, because of the changing of the ownership, will be able to use it for their day-to-day needs, will be able to use it for the food, will be able to use it for the refurbishment, will be able to use it for the various bills, and so on and so forth. Why? Because of the changing of ownership. Now remember, this changing of ownership can only apply with things which are halal and lawful from the beginning. Things which are haram and unlawful from the very beginning, you cannot change the ownership there. And a good example of that will be with regard to lottery funding. So this is an example, there's a Muslim or an Islamic center and they're taking lottery funding. So here the lottery is giving that person, say, £100,000. So that money which they've got is lottery funding, which comes from gambling, which comes from interest and other sources. So when that person has got it, it's haram from the very beginning. So therefore now when this Muslim wants to give it to another Muslim, it's still going to be haram. And if that Muslim now passes on to another Muslim, it's still also going to be haram. So what I'm trying to say is that this changing of ownership, it can only apply with things which are lawful and halal from the very beginning. Like with the example here with Barira and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because she was cautious, she was a recipient, she was worthy of receiving zakat. So for her it was zakat. Now she can give it to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as hadiyah, as a gift. Like for example, the madrasa students, they could take the fees, they could take the zakat money. Why? Because they are poor. Now they can give it back to the madrasa as tuition fees, considered more like a gift and a hadiyah. But when something is haram from the very beginning, like gambling money, so when that comes to a Muslim, now if that Muslim now gives it to other people, and so on, then it will remain unlawful and it will remain haram. It's like, take an example like, just say if somebody was to give you pig, or was to give you alcohol. Now because they are najasul ayn, they are unlawful and haram for Muslims to eat and consume, so if that Muslim now was to give it to another Muslim, it doesn't mean that, oh, that pork now is going to become HMC and it's going to become halal and like that, or that alcohol is going to become halal. No, it still remains unlawful and haram. Now, if that person was to give it to another Muslim, it will still remain unlawful and haram. And if he just keeps on going, it will still remain unlawful and haram. So exactly it's saying with regards to lottery funding or things which are purchased or bought with lottery money, just because of the changing of the hands cannot be used in that particular context. In Bolton, I'm not sure about in Birmingham area, but somebody asked me this question from Bolton, that it's very common that what they do is that, the various schools in Bolton, they use zakat money to pay, like obviously the schools, they receive like lottery funding, so they use the lottery funding, so not the zakat money, they use the lottery funding to buy like snacks for the children during their break time. So like these apples and milk which little kids get during break time. So these schools, there's around few schools in Bolton, they use the lottery funding, the grant they get from the lottery, they use that money to buy the apples and to buy the milk for the little kids and so on. So when you look at it in that situation, it's obviously not permissible for the little children or for the parents to let their young children eat the apples and milk. Why? Because of they were purchased from lottery money. As I already explained before, that the lottery funding here, the lottery money, when it's now given to people, there's no changing of hands. Okay, even though you may go to a non-Muslim and then it's coming to Muslim children, it's still there's no tabdil milkiyah, there's no changing of ownership. Why? Because the actual wealth in itself is unlawful and haram from the very beginning. So therefore, that would not be allowed. So basically, the conclusion of this ruling is that when it comes to the fees of madrasa, because there's a changing of ownership, so therefore it will be permissible and lawful. Some other rulings here with regards to zakat. Another ruling, these are just miscellaneous rulings. Number one is this masla with regards to delay giving the zakat all the way up to the month of Ramadan. Now it's very common that what sometimes people do is that, as I mentioned last week, that zakat is obligatory every Islamic lunar year. Okay, so whenever you got your nisab, whenever you reach that threshold, which is approximately £300, so just say, for example, you reach that threshold, that nisab, say, in the month of Muharram. So what will now happen is that the next year, the month of Muharram, because 12 months has passed, you will now have to give zakat. What sometimes people do is that the zakat has already been made obligatory before, but they wait until the month of Ramadan to give it. And they think that, oh well, if I was to give it in the month of Ramadan, then I'll get more reward and more sawab. Now, don't get me wrong, you will get more reward and more sawab with that hadith that any kind of farz act you do, you get the reward of 70 farais and so on. Don't get me wrong, you will get it. But that particular hadith applies for those people upon whom zakat is obligatory from one Ramadan to another. His Islamic lunar year starts from Ramadan and he ends in Ramadan. So if he was to give zakat in the month of Ramadan, yeah, fair enough, he will get 70 times more reward. However, if somebody's zakat is, is becoming obligatory in the month of Muharram, which is like the first month of the year, and now he's waiting 9 months, because obviously Ramadan is the 9th month of the Islamic year, so he's now waiting 9 months before he gives zakat in the month of Ramadan, thinking that will be more rewardable, then that is wrong. Because as soon as it becomes obligatory something, then you should give it straight away. That's why it's mentioned in the Quran, فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ, that hasten towards good deeds. Why? Because as I mentioned many times before, we do not know when death will come. Okay, death is just around the corner. We're not sure when we're going to pass away, and that's why scholars like Imam Qarqi rahimullah is of the view that zakat should be given straight away. The other Hanafi scholars have said that, yeah, fair enough, if there's like a delay for a few months and then you give the zakat, then the zakat will be done. But Imam Qarqi rahimullah, a Hanafi scholar, he's of the view that you should give the zakat ASAP. Why? Because you do not know when death is around the corner, when death is around, when you're going to pass away. Because if you did pass away, then obviously you will be questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for not giving zakat on something which is obligatory and farz upon you. Which then takes me on to the next point here, the next ruling, and that is with regards to, just say if somebody passed away and he hadn't given zakat. So what should he do in that situation? Like sometimes people, they pass away and they haven't been giving zakat for many, many years. Or sometimes people, they have been, they didn't calculate the zakat properly. Or sometimes out of laziness or sometimes out of ignorance, they didn't give zakat on certain things. So what would happen in that situation? Now there are two rulings with regards to, or two scenarios with regards to people who have passed away and they've got zakat outstanding. The first situation is that the person, before he passes away, he makes a bequest or he makes a will. So he makes a wasiyah, he makes a will, he makes a bequest that I'm going to pass away, just say he's on his deathbed, he's going to pass away any minute or any time soon. So he then says to his children that, look, I've got £100 zakat outstanding, I've got £1,000 zakat outstanding, can you take it out of my inheritance when I pass away? So in that situation, when he now passes away, £1,000 which was outstanding from his zakat, will now be taken from his inheritance and will be given to the poor, will be given to the needy. So that's straightforward. Now the second scenario, which is obviously the most common scenario, is that someone passes away and he had zakat left outstanding, but he didn't make a will or a bequest. An example could be something like, he died in an accident or sudden death or a tragic death where, very young he just passed away, or in an accident and so on. Or just say, for example, he passed away, he was old, but because he was going through the difficulties and the pangs of death, he couldn't, remember about zakat and other kind of things. Now, in that situation, the ruling will be the heirs, i.e. the inheritors, the sons, the daughters, the children, they cannot take out zakat from the deceased wealth. They won't be able to take it. Why? Because he didn't make a bequest, so therefore the children afterwards, they cannot say, take out the zakat, the outstanding zakat from their father's inheritance. But instead what will happen is that the children out of their own will, so again there's no force, if the children out of their own will want to give, say, X, Y, and Z amount to the poor or to the needy from their father's zakat, which is outstanding, then that would be permissible, that would be lawful. But they cannot take it out of their father's inheritance. And this is something which inshallah we'll look at later when we touch on inheritance and wasiyat and making wills, is that when somebody passes away, then that's it. Whatever is left behind, then it's now the Sharia which governs his estate and his property. You don't govern his estate anymore. When somebody passes away, that's it. The Sharia now takes over and they kind of split out and distribute his inheritance and his property. And as I said, we'll look at it later on, that firstly what will happen, the Sharia says that from the deceased inheritance and estate or property, you should use the money for his janaza, for his kafan, for his ghusl, for his bathing, for the area or for the land where he's going to be buried. Thereafterwards, whatever is left over, then if he's got any debt, then that will be used for the debt. If afterwards, if he made any bequest or wills, then obviously that will be used for the wills. And if any bequest was not made, then afterwards, the rest of the property will be distributed amongst the inheritors, amongst the heirs, with the son getting double of what the daughter gets, the parents, if they are alive, they get 1/6, and so on and so forth. Mentioned the Quran in detail in Surah Al-Nisa, Yusikumullahu fi awladikum, lidzakari mithlu hadhil unsayayn. Under that particular ruku or section, the entire crux of inheritance law is mentioned under that particular ruku and section. So what I'm trying to say is that when somebody passes away, if he hadn't made any bequest, then the Sharia just now will take over his property and they will set out the rules and they will say, okay, who will get what and who will get what portion. So that's why after that, the inheritors themselves won't be able to, take out a percentage of money and give it to the poor from their father's zakat, which is outstanding. So the conclusion is that if somebody has passed away, he's got zakat left over, then if he made a will or a bequest, then fair enough, you can take his zakat from his inheritance. If he didn't, then you won't be able to take it from his inheritance, but if the heirs out of their own will want to give it, then that would be allowed, that would be permissible. The third ruling which I want to mention here is with regards to, especially in our Asian family, where a lot of people, like 2-3 brothers, they may be living together, and whatever they earn, they tend to give everything to their parents or to their father. And then what happens at the end of the year, the father then gives the zakat on everybody's share and everybody's portion or everybody's wealth. He in total gives the zakat on everybody. Now the question is that, is this permissible or not? So the ruling is that as long as the family members have permitted or have given permission, then it will be permissible for one member of the family to give zakat on behalf of the other members of the family. As I said, it's very common in our Asian families where there may be like 3-4 brothers living in one house, they're all earning, so 2-3 daughters living in one house, they're also earning as well. But whatever they earn, they give everything to their parents or to their father. And then what happens at the end of the year, the father then will give zakat on the entire amount of the family's income. So as long as everybody has consented to that and agree with what the father is doing, then it will be permissible and then it will be allowed. Now some other rulings here. The fourth ruling is with regard to renting out items and how to give zakat on rented items. Now you could have someone like, say for example, there's a person who's got like a fleet of cars and he's renting out cars. Now the question is that how does he give zakat? Does he give zakat on the value of the car, or does he just give zakat on the rent which he's receiving from the car? Now the ruling is that you only give zakat on the rent which you are receiving from the car and not on the actual value of the car itself. Yeah, because obviously, unless you've got the cars there with the intention of reselling, as I mentioned before, that's different. You will have to give zakat on the value of the car. However, if your business is just leasing out cars or hiring out cars to people, so you know the fleet of cars which you have, you don't give zakat on the fleet of cars. Like I said, there may be like, a BMW worth, 10,000, 15,000 pounds. You don't have to give zakat on the value of the 15,000. But obviously when people are hiring you out and they are giving you, the higher money and they're giving you the rent or the wages for that, then obviously you will only give zakat on that particular amount. And the same also applies for people who are hiring out homes and houses, or like for example flats and so on. So you don't give value of the house for zakat. Whatever you're getting from the rent, the income, you will give 2.5% of that. However, the value of the house, which may be worth 100,000 pounds, you don't have to give zakat on that. So just keep that in mind. Anything which you are renting or leasing out, you don't give zakat on the item itself. So obviously, the income which you are gaining from that, the rent which you are receiving from that, then you will have to give zakat only on that particular item. Now, this takes me on to the next section, which I'm going to make a start on in this week's lesson, is with regard to who can we give zakat to, or who are the recipients of zakat. So we mentioned, some rulings with regard to zakat, but now we need to look at who are the recipients of zakat. Now the recipients of zakat are quite clearly mentioned in the Holy Quran, in Surah At-Tawbah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ. That sadaqat, i.e. zakat, number one is for the fuqara and is for the poor people. Number two, wal masakin, and for the masakin and for the destitute. So first and foremost, your zakat wealth, your zakat money, it can be given to the poor, or if you want, you can give it to the needy and you can give it to the destitute. Now what's the difference between the word fakir and the word miskin? The word fuqara and the word masakin, the poor and the needy, what's the difference? Now in the Hanafi fiqh, the word fakir basically means someone who doesn't have wealth which is equivalent to the nisab amount, which is equivalent to that amount on which zakat becomes obligatory upon him. So as I mentioned, that nisab is around £300. So just say somebody has savings of £295. Because he doesn't have savings of 300, but he has savings of 295, he technically speaking is called a fakir. And he is actually worthy of receiving zakat. He could actually take zakat, that person. Why? Because he doesn't have any wealth or any money which is equivalent to the nisab amount. So you can actually give him zakat. So that is the definition of fakir. Whereas the definition of miskin is someone who doesn't have anything at all, who is really poor, doesn't have a pence in his pocket, total miskin, clothes all over the place, tattered, ripped and so on. You call these people miskin. So fakir is someone who may have something, but it's less than the nisab amount, whereas miskin is someone who doesn't have anything at all. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you can give zakat to poor people, to fakir, and obviously you can give zakat to the needy, to the miskin, to the destitute, those who have nothing at all in their pocket, those who don't even have a shelter, those who don't have accommodation, any food, nothing like that, you can give them zakat money. So these are the two, the fuqara wal masakin. Thereafter, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to say, wal amilina alayha. The amilin, as I kind of briefly mentioned last week, are those people who are working on behalf of the Islamic government or Islamic state to collect zakat from people. Now basically what happened during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, I'll just explain the brief history, that during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time and also during Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's time and Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu's time, people, they had money and they also had animals like sheep, goats, camels and so on. And what would happen is that the Islamic State, they will send someone to go to every single person's house, check how much money he has and take zakat from that, and also check how many animals or how many goats or camels he has and take zakat accordingly. So that was the scenario during Prophet ﷺ's time, during Sayyidina Abu Bakr anhu's time, Sayyidina Umar anhu's time. However, thereafter, during Sayyidina Uthman anhu's time, because of the slowly Islam was kind of gradually increasing, and there were many like victories in various battles and so on. So Muslims were slowly getting rich. So what happened was that it was now very difficult for an army, for a worker on behalf of the Islamic government to go to every single person's house and check every single thing. Even like example, us as well, we got so many things. We may have businesses, we have money in our accounts, we have money at home, we have money probably in another account in Bangladesh, Pakistan, other countries. We got money all over the world. We got business here, we got this here, we got that here. So if one person was to come and check everything, you won't have time to check everybody. So therefore Sayyidina Uthman anhu then said that okay, those who have money, like we call them amwal batina, i.e. nuqud, i.e. silver and gold, they have to give zakat on it themselves. i.e. the owner of it, they have to give zakat on it themselves. So you've got cash in hand, you've got gold and silver, you yourself will have to give zakat. If you don't, then obviously in the hereafter you'll be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas this army or this worker who will be sent by the Islamic government, he will come to your house and he will check how much zakat you need to give for animals and for crops. So that was his responsibility. He will come and check how many animals do you have, how many camels do you have this year, and accordingly he will take the zakat. He will see how much crops did you grow this year, in your agriculture, and then he will take zakat from that. So that was his responsibility. During Prophet ﷺ's time, his responsibility was everything. He would also take zakat from your gold and silver as well. But because obviously it was getting too difficult for the armies to check everything, so therefore the army's responsibility was slightly restricted in terms of he will only take zakat from your crops and from your animals, and with regard to gold and silver, you will have to give zakat yourself. So now going back to the Quranic verse where Allah says, وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا, it's only for those people who come from an Islamic government to collect your zakat from your animals, from your crops. They themselves, as wages for their work, actually can take zakat money. So the zakat money which people are giving as wages, like you said, commission, you could say that they come all the way from this capital city. Obviously during the history, because obviously there were various capital cities. It was in Medina Munawwara, then he went to Kufa, then he went to Dimashq, then he went to Damascus and so on. It kind of went all over, many different places was the Islamic capital city. So because he's coming from a very long way, he spent a lot of effort, a lot of money and so on. So he will be allowed to take a commission for his work. He could actually take zakat money. So the Sharia allowed that. That's what he says, وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا. Obviously last week I mentioned regarding Islamic Relief and other kind of organizations, they cannot use that particular Quranic injunction for their benefit. Why? Because they are not doing it on behalf of the Islamic government. They're just like doing it out of their own will. So when we give zakat money to them, they are considered more like our agents and our wakil to give zakat to the recipient, and they are not considered to be actual workers on behalf of the Islamic government. So that's number 3, وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا. Number 4, the fourth recipient of zakat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ. That those people who you can give zakat to, with the intention of bringing them closer towards Islam. Now there's many categories of this particular word, وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ. Some scholars have said that basically these people were non-Muslims, they were non-believers, and to get them closer towards Islam, you can give them zakat money. Or like for example, they were non-believers, but because you may fear that, look, if I don't give them a sweetener, if I don't give them any money and so on, then they may harm me, they may do something against me, so you can give them zakat money. Some of the scholars have said that this category has got nothing to do with non-believers, it's actually got to do with Muslims, i.e. those believers who are believers but their iman is weak. So Rasulullah would give them zakat money so that they stay within the ambit of Islam and the ambit of the believers. Now Rasulullah at the beginning of Islam, he did that, and there was a need for that. Why? Because Islam was very, very weak. If you take an example of the situations of Muslims in Makkah, very, very weak. There was like torture, there was like difficulties, there was like pain, there was abuse, there were so many things were going on. A lot of people were, because they were scared of reprisals, they didn't want to become believers, they didn't want to become Muslims. So at that particular time, and also in the very beginning of Hijrah, when Rasulullah companion migrated to Medina Munawwara, there was a need of a lot of Muslims. There was a need to actually like a large group of Muslims so that they can save themselves from any attacks from the pagans of Makkah. So Rasulullah would actually give zakat to either non-believers to get them closer towards Islam, or to weak Muslims so that they stay within the ambit of Islam. But later on, some scholars have said that this category has now been abrogated. There's no need of this category in this day and age. Why? Because, okay, fair enough, even though you could say like Muslims are not that strong in that way, but there are many, many more Muslims than during Rasulullah time. Many hundreds, millions, billions of Muslims all over the world. So therefore, there's actually more Muslim people, so this particular category is not needed anymore. Other scholars have said that this particular category is something what we call in Arabic ma'lul bil illah. Ma'lul bil illah basically means that if in the future, if there is a need to bring non-Muslims closer towards Islam, or to bring Muslims who have got belief or iman but it's very, very weak, but to get them more closer towards Islam, then you can actually give them zakat money. Okay, but this is something which scholars have said that it's something where there has to be like a consensus or a kind of ijma from scholars, and because no consensus or ijma has been given, because when you look at it, some may argue and say, well, in this day and age you should be actually using this category, because there are many, many Muslims who are very, very weak in their iman. So to actually bring them closer towards Islam, to actually give them zakat money. So you could obviously understand that point of the argument, but because there's no actually authoritative ruling from any kind of governing body or any kind of Islamic state and so on, so therefore we won't be able to use that particular reasoning ourselves and say, okay, let's give zakat to these weak believers. But others are saying that, some scholars are saying that it's abrogated this category, there's no need of that anymore. Some scholars have said that no, it's not abrogated, but if there is a need for it in the future, then you can still give zakat to these non-believers to get them closer towards Islam, or to believers but with iman is weak, and so that they stay within the ambit of Islam, so that they remain steadfast in the iman, you can give them this zakat money. And this is the fourth category which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned. The other four categories, inshallah, we'll look at next week when Allah is tawfiq, tracking, and said, wa akhiru da'wana.